This is Golden Years, a roadmap to navigate retirement with Mark Cordner, the podcast.
Senator Bernie Sanders, he is, really catching others' attention over a bill that he recently introduced. He would set a 32-hour work week as the standard over 4 years with no reduction in pay. Listen, just hearing that 32-hour work week, no reduction in pay, sign me up. Well,
Yeah,
Shark
hallelujah.
Tank's, yeah, right? Let's go. Shark Tank's Kevin O'Leary had plenty to say about this on Fox Business.
There are bad ideas, there are very bad ideas, and there are very, very, very bad ideas. And then there are ideas that are so bad they're un-American. This is an insane idea. It's never going to happen. We're the number one economy on earth for a reason. A third of the population strives to be entrepreneurial. There is no life-work balance when you're an entrepreneur, when you start your business. You do that to achieve financial freedom. That is the American dream. That's what my entrepreneurs do every day. I tell them, if you don't come in on Saturday, don't even bother coming in on Sunday.
Yikes. I don't know if I agree with him. What do you think about that?
We all love that idea, and I think Bernie Sanders would probably be a fun neighbor to have, probably a great entertaining guy. I think he's absolutely delusional, though, when it comes to the idea of economics. Basically, he has no understanding of economics. He's never run a business. He's never had to meet payroll. He doesn't understand things. But certainly that's an appealing idea. I mean, this idea of work-life balance is the great challenge of life for all of us. And so to be talking about reducing hours and emphasizing non-monetary things, I think has value. But the other reality is simply we got to feed our kids, and we're going to have to be able to take care of ourselves in the future. And we cannot look to the government the way that Bernie Sanders would have us believe, because the government doesn't have the money to be there for us. So I like what Kevin Leary is saying. I certainly like that, he speaks about people's desire for opportunity versus security. That's really the entrepreneurial theme, is opportunity. I've been very poor myself at this work-life balance. I worked 100 hours a week when I started. It got down to 80 hours a week. I'm probably down to 60 now after 30 years. My hope is to get to 40 and then down to 20 and, kind of phase out over time. But it's not a simple thing, and everyone's got different things in their life driving what is important to them. So, yeah, it's entertaining. It's fun to hear these kind of proposals, but the truth is, most people we just can't generate 40 hours of revenue off of 32 hours of work.
Nah, all right, party pooper. I guess you make sense. You make sense, I guess. Yeah. Well, I mean, honestly, though, it's kind of like retirement, right? You work that 40 hours a week. You hope to find that life balance after you leave the job. So transitioning into retirement, it really is. Talk about a transition, and it's almost like you have to rebalance everything, because before you're balancing work, agenda, meetings, all that stuff. And now every day is Saturday. So finding things to fill your time, finding things to give you that balance of joy and happiness and fulfillment is also a big conversation.
It really is. People have to have purpose going into retirement. So I have no problem with people working 32 hours a week or 20 hours a week or whatever they can afford to get by on if it's a choice. When it's a necessity and it constrains us, that's a different story. But yes, going into retirement, we're seeing a wonderful trend now where people are kind of testing the waters, as it were, where they're convincing their employers to allow them to phase back. And rather than suddenly drop from 40 hours a week to 0 hours a week, they're phasing back to 30 and then to 20 and out they go, kind of thing. But it's good for the business. It's good for the younger employees to have the more experienced employees around. And it's great for those experienced employees to see, can I really do this? Can I get by on less income? And how am I going to spend my days? That sudden drop can be very difficult for a lot of people to lose their structure. And so it's important to have purpose. Yeah, that's a key part of our conversations with clients. How are you going to spend your days when it doesn't feel like vacation anymore?
When you first get into retirement, I imagine for the first 2 weeks, maybe a month, it's all fun and games. You're golfing, you're going on road trips, you're sitting on the couch, watching Netflix, name it. And then after a couple weeks, you go, okay, well, what now? I kind of got that out of my system. So finding a purpose for you is just as important as finding a purpose for your income and your money in retirement. People hear the word retirement, I instantly think they just start seeing dollar signs in their head, and it really goes past that conversation. Clearly, income's important. We want to make sure you don't run out of money. Yes, but we also want to make sure What's your bucket list look like? Do you want to go on trips? How many trips a year do you want to go on? Do you want to, surprise the grandkids and take them to Disney? And let's be honest, a lot of us working 50, 60 years, maybe like you, 60, 70 hours a week, we haven't thought about a bucket list item. Our bucket list item is getting Monday through Friday and checking it off the list. We haven't thought about, the next 20 years. I mean, seriously.
Yeah, and it's really, I think one of the great challenges is getting couples on the same page, because we think, having lived our lives together, that we're all thinking the same way. But and I've seen this in my own marriage just very recently, even, where we have been discussing certain topics for a couple years, and then suddenly we went out to see a property, for example, I thought would have as our retirement home, and she's like, no way. And I'm like, what do you mean? We've been talking about this for a couple of years. So, how we're going to spend our time, that image, that particular property didn't fit the way she saw herself interacting with nieces and nephews and hopefully grandkids in the years. It was perfect for me, little fancy little condo kind of thing. But so these kind of issues are different for all of us. And it's a great challenge to get couples on the same page. I would be completely thrilled to spend the rest of my life in a library and just watching international films and doing quiet things that really don't cost anything. But that's not really the vision that my family has. And so we've got to get on the same page. And that is a process for people. And I really can't overemphasize this enough. I insist on having couples together in appointments, because we start down one road and then the other spouse feels differently. We've just got to be on the same page. It's just so important. So what more reason to come in and meet with a professional, I think, because people start saying things out loud, and one spouse is looking at the other, and that I think is critical. I think the drive to and from my seminars and the drive to and from my office is probably the most important time for couples.
The 2024 Major League Baseball season is underway, and like the rest of us, most players see their regular paycheck end when they retire, but there's actually 4 retired stars who deferred some or most of their income, and they are still receiving checks today. There's a list I gave you there, Mark, one of them being Ken Griffey Jr., Manny Ramirez, Bobby Bonilla. So, how can we do the same thing in retirement? These guys are smart.
No, I think they're very smart in doing it. Before I answer that question, I'll give a little personal story. When I was in college, I financed my way through college with scholarships and with teaching assistant positions. One of the best paying jobs on campus was tutoring the athletes. And so I actually tutored guys who later became NFL pros. And I remember with some of them thinking, well, number one, they didn't belong on the university campus. But number two was just a sense that I hope they get good advisors in the future, because it was clear that they were extremely good at what they had focused on. And you got to take your hat off to them for that. But you hear all these horror stories about athletes who end up impoverished after they have this, 5 to maybe 10-year experience in professional sports. And they've often blown through the money because they didn't know how to handle it. Well, there's some great lessons for all of us in this. And these examples you've referenced are, I think, wonderful, because people have earmarked a portion of their money for the future. They've learned to live on less. There was an athlete I read about recently, I can't think of his name, a football player who has saved like 95% of his earnings. And he's just lived incredibly conservatively, but because he has some specific goals for after professional athletics. And so this idea of deferring, it's this idea of living on less now that I think is so critically important. We had a business owner come into us recently, came to one of our public education classes, and he had just sold his business, and he didn't know how to turn this lump sum of money into income that he would not be able to outlive. And that was his real goal. He wanted to make sure he would always have income. He wanted to have a pretty healthy amount. He wanted about $150 a year minimum to be able to spend, actually a bit more than that, but that was his minimum. And so what we were able to do was design for him a plan that addressed the next 3 decades. He's 65-ish, and it addressed the next 3 10-year segments of time where we could contractually assure him income that between Social Security and these other sources of income could not have him be less than what he needed. But that required him to make certain choices today that were different than what he thought coming in to meet with us. And so you don't know what you don't know. And that's why we always tell people, come on in. We've met with hundreds of people over the last 30 odd years, and we can share some ideas with you, some strategies and some financial instruments that you may never have heard of, but that can give you that assurance, that confidence you need going forward. And so I take my hat off to these particular athletes you've mentioned who actually prioritize their future. That's a hard thing for most Americans. That's a really hard thing, not to live in the moment, but to think of the future.
Investment advisory services offered through Golden Years Financial LLC, a registered investment advisory firm. Insurance is offered through Golden Years Insurance Services. These firms do not provide legal or tax advice. Consult your own legal and tax advisors before taking actions that may have tax implications. Investing in securities involves risk, including the potential loss of principal. Insurance contracts' principal protection is based on the claim-paying ability of the respective insurer. None of the information contained on this website shall constitute an offer to sell or solicit to buy a security or insurance product. The information and opinions contained on this site or requested from this site are provided by third parties believed to be reliable, but accuracy and completeness cannot be guaranteed. They are provided for informational purposes only and are not a solicitation to buy or sell any of the products mentioned. Any media logos and or trademarks contained herein are the property of their respective owners, and no endorsement by those owners of Mark Cordner, Golden Years Financial, or Golden Years Insurance is stated or implied.